And I saw a saying that someone said, my dad told me, if you got nothing nice to say, it's because you're in the shul parking lot after a board meeting.
I like that.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on love your fellow Jew?
Well, you're supposed to.
You're supposed to.
Yeah. I mean, it's the right thing to do.
So the question over here that we are going to pose is first of all, what is it? What does it actually mean? What is the obligation? What are
Mhm.
the confines of the obligation? Where would you say, oh, you must do that because there's a mitzvah, love your fellow Jew? What is a very code of Jewish law from a halachic standpoint? From, if you were a
Mhm.
lawyer,
Mhm.
how would you, or if you were a judge, how do you define it? When would you say, oh, you're crossing the line? This is your obligation of love your fellow
Mhm.
Jew. What is the mitzvah? What did God command us to do?
Be kind.
To be kind.
Kindness. Um, and whatever he considers a mitzvah, whether it's helping them, giving, charity, whatever. It's just a matter of, it's it. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say it at all.
Right. So the interesting thing is, I should have put this slide before this slide. And I'll do that first, actually. So, like you said, the regular traditional way of understanding this is it's a matter of action. So it should have
Right.
said essentially, not love your fellow Jew as yourself, which is the sentence, which is a very interesting sentence that we must understand. But it should have said, be kind, period.
Mm.
And seemingly it's saying something else. It's not saying love, but say be kind. Not only is love not what it seems to say, but love seems to be impossible because first of all, how could I be expected to love someone else as myself? Obviously, I'm always going to love myself more than the other person. So even if I'm going to, if I see them as another, if I see them as a separate entity from me, so then even if I'm going to, come to appreciate them and maybe think about their greatness and whatever it might be, no matter how far you go, even with a spouse, we know that to love them as much as I love myself, like we love ourselves a whole lot, and that's an understatement. So to expect such a possibility that I could possibly love someone else as much as I love myself, how is that even a rational thing to say?
I
How is
think
that
it's
even
pretty
fair?
rational. However,
Come on in. Hello, hello. We're a quiet group today. No, there's no one sleeping. No need to be quieter. There's no one sleeping. My family's actually out in Stony Point.
Oh,
We're
very nice.
we're in Stony Point for Shabbos. I drove in this morning.
I apologize, it was tough to find parking.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's, yeah. And I was like, that's what I really did when I walked in. I was like expecting to see the room filled, and
Yeah,
which is shocking anyway, because it's a holiday.
yeah. Maybe that's why more people are awake. So, so first of all, could I get you there's hot water in the kitchen. Could I get you some
Oh,
hot
this
water?
is great. Thank you. That's
A coffee or some
No,
tea?
this is great. Thank you. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Good.
And please help yourself with the bagels and cream cheese. There's napkins under the bagels. So just to backtrack and catch you up where we're at in this class. So we started off with the question, what does it mean? God commanded us to love every Jew as much as we love ourselves. And Joanne pointed out that the traditional way of understanding that would be to be kind. And the reason why that's the traditional way is because how is that possible to say love someone as much as you love yourself? That seems to be something that's simply not possible. That just doesn't make any sense. We love ourselves as much as we are ourselves. And to love someone else for who they are, that we could do, but to love them as much as we love ourselves, that seems to be not really possible. And secondly, when it comes to a very basic understanding of Torah tradition, we usually approach it from a very do or don't perspective, which is the code of Jewish law. What are the rules? What are the regulations? So if God said, put on tefillin, so the question is, what does that consist of? God said, light Shabbos candles, what does that consist of? So when God said, love somebody, okay, so what does that consist of? Does it consist of giving charity? Does it consist of giving them a hug? Does it consist of being a support? What does that consist of? So therefore, it automatically translates into action, right? The same way when you tell a child, love your friend, they don't hear any emotion, they hear action. They hear that you're telling them to do something. And that's how we translate it. We translate it as action. So, which takes me to this slide over here, which is we think of love as action, whether it's giving, kindness, and sharing, which begs the question, then why does it say love your fellow as yourself? We'll get to as yourself later on, but the premise of love, just say be kind. I don't have to love them to be kind. I could hate them and be kind to them. So say be kind to them. If that's what the mitzvah is about, so then that's what it should say, right? Another point, which is the next point of why it would seemingly be about being kind and not about loving, is because this is a general question. Is it possible to command someone to have an emotion? Could you command an emotion? Or seemingly you could only command action. You can't really command someone to feel something, right? If someone had a great line, he said, some people sometimes this is in general, it's not Jewish related particularly. It's any, everything good comes with a mix of bad. Any one of the downs of organized religion is that there's a certain pressure to feel something. And a child could grow up with this feeling in any religion of, you got to love God or you got to fear God. And so I heard from Rabbi Shays Taub is a great thinker and, really understands Judaism from a much more authentic perspective. And he says, sometimes you'll see these kids or even young adults or even older people that grew up in a specific religion and they express certain emotions for it, whether it's excitement, whether it's tears. And he says, those tears are not fear of God, they're anxiety of the fact that they're not feeling, right? So there's a certain pressure that they grew up with of, I was told to feel, and I can't feel, so I'm feeling the anxiety of not feeling, and that's what I'm experiencing.
Interesting.
Right? So this becomes the question, how can you command to love? Which the truth is a general question, because God commands us to love him, love God, to fear God. So the concept of how could God command us to love is a general question. The answer to that question is quite simple. How could God command us to have a feeling? The answer is because not all of us are aware of this because it's something that we have to exercise to be aware of it. But the fact is that emotions, our own emotions, could stem from two different things. They could stem from nature, right? So we were born with a certain emotion, whether we're naturally this way or that way, or our feelings, or maybe a better word is tendencies, could come from experience. Now, experiences could be imposed, which most of our experiences are imposed. Or if we're a proper human being and we exercise our brain, we create our own experiences.
Yeah.
Right? And we know the whole concept of mindfulness is about creating experiences. And if you create an experience for yourself, you could eventually have a feeling from that experience. And that's not only that could happen, but if the experience is a thorough experience, that will happen. We do feel based on our experiences when the experience is a thorough experience. And therefore, essentially, when God says, love me, we'll get to love your fellow Jew in a minute. But for now, when God says, love God, what's the commandment? The commandment is to love, to have a feeling, to have an emotion, to feel good about God. But how is that possible? How is that possible to create a feeling for God? How is that possible to foster an emotion for God? The answer is very simple. By creating an experience. How do we create an experience? Through our brains. By meditating, by thinking, by studying about the greatness of God, and allowing yourself to experience that truth that you studied. The more we do that, if we have a thorough experience, if we allow ourselves to properly think about that greatness of God and meditate on it, and then to start thinking why that's something that's good for me, why that enhances my life, we will walk away with a good emotion about it. We will feel good about it. And then when someone mentions the name God, we'll get a feeling of security, we'll get a feeling of warmth, we'll get a feeling of happiness, which came from the meditation. So essentially, what is God commanding us to do? Again, like both of you said, a commandment is to do something. So when God says, love God, what did he tell us to do? What he told us to do was meditate on God. When we meditate on God, we will create an emotion. Hence the commandment, love God. The question over here is, how does that pertain, or does that pertain to love your fellow as yourself? What could I possibly meditate on that's going to bring me to love them as myself? So obviously a very simple way of saying it is think about their good qualities, think about what they bring to the table, like we spoke about last time you were here, judge them favorably, so see them as a good person. All those things will foster, benefit of the doubt, so that will foster good emotions towards them, positive emotions towards them. But obviously, that would not be considered loving them as yourself.
True.
And therefore, halacha, like we said before, the code of Jewish law will revert back to a practical question. So practically, what does it mean to love your fellow as yourself? And this is just a fun exercise, and we'll get back to what the mystics say about this, which is going to be the main point of our conversation here. But just for the sake of having a fun time, the Gemara, the Talmud, mentions love your fellow as yourself a few times within the Talmud, which is a very interesting thing, and it's something that I personally have a appreciation for. I really appreciate this concept. The reason why it's intriguing when the Talmud mentions love your fellow as yourself is simply because we know that love your fellow as yourself is a phrase from the Bible, right? But we have another famous phrase from the sage Hillel. Have you heard of Hillel before? So Hillel was approached by a convert. The convert went first to Shammai, who was the other great sage at the time, and this convert said, "Teach me the whole Torah on one foot." And Shammai said, "That's impossible. You're making a disgrace of the Torah." Which was true. He was trying to disgrace the Torah. So he left and he went to Hillel. And he said, "Rabbi Hillel, teach me the whole Torah while I'm standing on one foot." How do you do that? Torah is huge. Torah is vast. And Hillel said, the entire Torah is do not do unto others what you wouldn't want to be done to yourself. Okay. Do not do unto others what you wouldn't want to be done to yourself. And then he said, that's the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. So let's take this apart. First of all, he gave us a little more wording for what it means. Love your fellow as much as you love yourself. What does that mean? It means do not treat others as you treat yourself. Very practical thing. Treat others as you treat yourself. When you're talking to someone, always ask them, always ask yourself, would you appreciate that conversation? Would you appreciate being treated this way? Would you appreciate being dealt with this way? And then he said, this is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. So obviously that's a very puzzling statement. The reason why it's a very puzzling statement is because what's the connection between lighting Shabbos candles or keeping Shabbos or putting on tefillin to loving your fellow as yourself? How would that connect? Well, let's assume for now, just for the sake of next few minutes, that he didn't mean the entire Torah. Maybe he just meant the parts of Torah that talk about treating other people, don't steal, don't kill, being honest in business, all these different rules and regulations. Don't badmouth other people. So we have a list of mitzvahs, a good percentage of the Torah, which is about civil rules. They're not about godly rules. They're not about man to God. They're man to man, human to human. Says Hillel, what's the overall rule on that? The overall rule is simply treat others as well as you would treat yourself. Simple enough. With that said, it would seem like the Talmud should never ever quote this statement for a very simple reason. They should either never quote it or they should always quote it. Because any part of Talmud that deals with civil rights, civil rules, will always quote a verse that talks about that. The verse says, don't steal. The verse says, don't kill. So when the Talmud talks about not stealing, does it say, don't steal because you should love your fellow as yourself? No, it doesn't say that. It says, don't steal because it says, don't steal. Right? Don't kill because it says, don't kill. So the verse that we choose is not this overarching rule. It's the very particular rule of don't kill or don't steal or how to treat your neighbor or whatever it might be in whatever circumstance. So for that reason, it would seem like it should never quote this general rule, love your fellow as yourself. There's very few times in the Talmud that it does quote this verse. And the question becomes, so if you're quoting it, then why don't you always quote it? Doesn't everything go under this umbrella? Like, why does this become the reason for doing this or that? There's two places that I know of that quotes this verse, or it's more than two places, but there's two rules that we use this verse to learn a certain law in Torah, in Torah law, in Torah Judaism, in Torah structure, in the structure of Judaism and the way God wants us to run the world or to run our lives. Those two places are as follows. The first one, which is not as well known, is about a rule of getting married. So we know that in Torah law, it's not enough to just get married, but similar to civil law, where there's a legal marriage, in Torah law, there's a legal, quote unquote, legal marriage, right? So there's a rabbi and there's a chuppah, what we call a betrothal, where the man will turn to the woman and say, I hereby betroth you, according to the laws of God and Moses, and now they're legally married, right? And this creates a bond between the husband and wife. And there's a whole tractate in the Talmud discussing how this works and the different options of how to do this and what are the rules and regulations around this marriage ceremony, this marital ceremony. And generally speaking, the Talmud explains that there's three ways of acquiring a wife, so to speak, right? Of making a betrothal between a husband and wife. And one way is through money, which is what we do. We use a ring, which has monetary value. So we give money and we say, accept this money with my betrothal. So by giving that money and she's accepting the money, that creates this bond. Now there's this connection between them. The other way is through a document, a signed document, which we don't really do, that they sign a document together saying that they're getting married. I guess that's the way I do it in court, essentially. And then there's the third way, which is actually taking her into your home. That's a third option, which we don't do that. I mean, we do that as a second step, but we don't do that as a step of betrothal. Okay. Says the Talmud that the first two ways, the money and the contract, can be done either by yourself or through a messenger. Meaning, you don't actually have to be in the same city as her to get married to her. You could be living in China, she could be in Israel or in America, and you sent a shliach, you sent a messenger. And the messenger says, I'm here on behalf of so-and-so, and I'm giving you this money to accept that he is now married to you. So it's not that the messenger is married to her, it's that this guy in China is married to her. And the same could work the other way around. She could send a messenger to accept the money or to accept the document. The same applies to a divorce. when someone wants to divorce their spouse, so you have to give the divorce document to the spouse. This could also be done through a messenger. So you could appoint, if you don't actually want to meet, you could appoint someone to go and give or to accept the document. Either one could send a messenger. They could both send messengers, and the messengers give it to each other. The point being that a messenger works. Says the Talmud, if you're betrothing your wife, you're allowed to do it through a messenger, but you shouldn't do it through a messenger. Although it works. It works to do it through a messenger, but you should not do it through a messenger. You should only do it through a messenger. You're only allowed to do it through a messenger if you're unable to do it yourself. But if you're able to do it yourself, says the Talmud, it's unethical to do it through a messenger. It's usur, the Talmud says. It's prohibited. It's forbidden to do it through a messenger. Why is it forbidden? Where in the Torah does it say that you're not allowed to do it through a messenger if you're allowed to do it yourself? Says the Talmud, it says in the verse, love your fellow as much as you love yourself. How does that verse tell us that you're not allowed to betroth her through a messenger when you could do it yourself? And the answer is, at least my understanding of this piece of Talmud, is if a woman is being betrothed by a husband, and the assumption of the Talmud says the reason why you should do this is because the woman has a fear that if he didn't betroth her by looking at her, as in he never saw her, but he heard about her, he heard great things about her, and he said, I want to marry this woman. So he sends a messenger, give her this ring. I'm now married to her, and then we'll get together in a couple of weeks when I'm back from my business trip. When she receives that ring, she has a mixed emotion. She's very excited because now she's married. Obviously, she accepted it because she wanted to accept it. But she's also fearful that when he sees her, he's not going to be happy with what he sees, and then it's just going to go downhill from there. So there's a mixed emotion when it comes to being betrothed indirectly.
I don't think so.
Says the Talmud, guy, just like you wouldn't want to have that emotion, don't give her that experience if you're able to get around it. If you're able to do it yourself, don't do it through a messenger. You know why? The Torah says, do not do unto others what you don't want others to do to you. So this becomes a very simple law in the code of Jewish law. This is brought down in the code of Jewish law. There's a rule. You're allowed to marry someone through a messenger unless you could do it yourself. If you could do it yourself, you're not allowed to send a messenger. Why? Because you wouldn't want that done to you. Don't do it to somebody else. Very unique, very interesting how this is one of the only two times, as far as I'm concerned, in Talmud that this law is brought. The other one is a very interesting one. But I'm not going to get too detailed into it. The program that I used to make this change what it actually is, which I don't mind. But there's a discussion in the Talmud about a specific type of when someone is punishable by death, right? So there's certain things in the Torah, certain circumstances that a person could be punishable by death. And there's many, many laws about how it works and what's exactly the procedure of killing them. There's 4 types of death punishments, etc. And there is a argument in the Talmud about a specific one, and I'm not going to go into the details right now, but there's an argument in the Talmud about a specific execution on how it should be done. Should it be done this way, or should it be done that way? And one opinion says it should be done this way, and the other opinion says it should be done that way. And the basis of the argument, whether it should be done this way or that way, is if it's done this way, there's less pain, but there's more shame. If it's done that way, there's more pain, but there's less shame. And the question is,
Hmm.
which one would you rather? Which one would a person rather? Would a person rather more shame, less pain? Or would a person rather more pain and less shame? And
Good
this
question.
becomes the basis of the argument between these two rabbis. One rabbi says more pain, one rabbi says more shame. Both of them are trying to benefit the person that's being killed. We want to give him a better experience, less pain or less shame. But they have this argument. But what's the crux of the argument? Why are they arguing what they're arguing? They're arguing what they're arguing because of this premise. Love your fellow as yourself. Do not do unto others what you wouldn't want to be done to you. When we are going to execute another person, it's very unfortunate. They're deserving of it, obviously. However, we still have to ask ourselves, obviously, we're going to do it within the framework of what God told us to do. The question becomes, how would I want to be treated? If there's two options of doing it, it could be done this way or it could be done that way. And this way is more pain, but less shame. And this one is more shame, but less pain. I ask myself, how would I want that to be done to me? And I have to do it that way to the other person. This becomes a second rule in the code of Jewish law. It's not relevant today because we don't have death penalty today. The Jewish nation doesn't have death penalty today. But this becomes a second law in the framework of Jewish law, where this rule applies. Treat others as you would treat yourself, which is, I think so intriguing and just fascinating how this seemingly very general rule has an application, very, very practical application, very specific application in two areas which are very different areas. But again, two very specific areas. Perhaps there's more applications within Torah law. Obviously, the general gist of it is, like you said, be kind. And then this brings us back to the original question is that all what it's about? And if that's all what it's about, then why does it say the word love? Seemingly, it's not about love. It's about treating them with kindness. And to add to that, the other question that we mentioned before was, how did Hillel the sage, Hillel the elder, how did he say this becomes the umbrella of the entire Torah when seemingly it's only the umbrella of the civil laws? That wouldn't be the umbrella of the law between us and God. Whether we'll get to that, I'm not sure. I hope to get to it, but we'll see. But for now, we could simply go with, why does it the word love? Okay, which brings me to the next slide. Okay. So Kabbalah, as always, the Kabbalah, which we spoke about last week, what Kabbalah is all about. Kabbalah is the soul of the Torah. So if you think of the laws of the Torah, the rules, the regulations, you can think of that as a body, the Torah. The Kabbalah serves as a soul to the Torah, and we've spoken about the Kabbalah many, many times. Always the mystical meaning, the deeper meaning. Kabbalah says, no, love actually means to love. And I wish I wrote down what I had in mind for each one of these things. I'm just going to jump through my slides for a second. Oh, okay. I'm just jumping through to see. Okay, so the question over here is, I'm not even sure why this happened over here, but the question is, how can I love someone I don't even like? Right? How could I love someone that I don't even like? And this is going to take us to our handout.
You're just supposed.
And this is going to take us back to the Tanya, which we've explored a few times, different parts of the Tanya. The Tanya, as mentioned, is a very, very deep book with many, many layers. And I don't know if you could put it in one framework. It's a book of self-help. It's a book of connection to God. It's a book of mysticism. And amongst the chapters is one chapter which stands out a little bit as a sore thumb. It's not part of the continuation of Tanya, which is talking about self-growth, he sticks in the importance of loving other people and how we go about that, because he says this is connected to what we've been speaking about all along, which is the importance of focusing on our soul over our body. This is something that we've spoken about many times. The whole course that we gave about the meaning of the afterlife, as well as the class about sleep, was really focusing on this idea of we have a body, we have a soul. In life, we make choices between our body and our soul, and we get to choose what will our actions be, soul actions, or will they be bodily actions? Right? There was the other class that we spoke about the two souls, the godly soul and the animal soul. There's our animalistic desires, our desire to exist, our desire to survive, our survival instinct, which is purely egoistic. And then there is, not that it's bad, but it's egoistic. And then there is our desire to connect, our desire to be good, our desire to connect to God, to be truthful. And that desire is the soul desire. This is the same thing, body versus soul, or animal soul versus godly soul. And these are the decisions, these are the choices that we make in life. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is talking about in the Tanya at that point in chapter 31, how appreciating our own life and the way God gave it to us is by coming to appreciate our own soul and despising the parts of ourselves that are egoistic and self-centered, recognizing that that's not what life's about. Life's more than that. And that takes into chapter 32. Okay, so Joanne, you could take us. This is not necessarily the words of the Tanya, but this is the way it was kind of rewritten.
When a person views their body as secondary and their soul as primary, it becomes much easier to genuinely love others. When you focus on the soul, you recognize that every Jew shares the same divine source. At that level, we are not just similar, we are one. The body may separate us, but the soul unites us. That's why the command to love your fellow as yourself is possible. You don't need to create love. It already exists at the soul level. Just as you naturally love yourself, you can naturally love another because at your core you are the same. But if a person identifies primarily with the body status, personality, appearance, then true love is impossible. It becomes conditional based on external things. And once these things disappear, so does the love. Real love, the kind the Torah speaks of, comes from seeing yourself and others as souls first.
Okay, so this is something that we could really live with. This is an everlasting journey of how to love another person. And Torah is demanding of us, or asking of us, to spend time thinking about the fact that I'm not a desire for survival. I'm a desire to make the world a better place. I'm a desire to connect to God. Now, if I am a being that's just looking to survive, then the other person stands against me, because I want the bread for myself and he wants the bread for himself. At best, maybe I could say why that person enhances me, because if not for that person, I would go hungry. I need more people in the world to have a society. But to have the experience of they're just as good as me, or I love them as much as I love myself, they're worth the same as much as I'm worth, comes from recognizing that my life is not about myself. My life is about making the world a better place. If we live with that, which is a life journey to live with that, but it's a constant decision that we make. If we live with that feeling, the more we bring to the fore that I'm not here for myself, I'm here for a greater purpose. So then I don't love myself, I love my purpose. And if I love my purpose, then I love the other person's purpose, because my purpose doesn't conflict with their purpose. We have the same purpose. In other words, if we see all of us as a piece of God, so then we're one, because God is one. So if we see ourselves as a body, as separate entities, we're very much different. But if we see ourselves as a plan, as one universe, which the human being was blessed with the ability to do, right? We do see a unity within the world. We don't see everything as fragmented. What's the word? Yeah, separated, whatever it is. We see a certain unity. We see a certain flow, right? We see how animals enhance our life and we enhance the animal. We don't see things as separate. Take that to the next level. Take it a step further. There's one God with one plan, with one being. It's not about me, it's not about the I, it's about him. And therefore we're all one. And the secret of Tanya is saying that's not just idealistic, but it's actually a soul that we have in ourselves. It's a truth that we know. And, although your average person will tell you that didn't study Tanya, that's very nice, that's very idealistic, but it's just not reality. We can't live with that. Tanya says, no, you have a soul which only knows that. You have a soul which doesn't have an I, which is what we spoke about in the previous class or a few classes ago. You have a soul that only knows God, and that's all it wants. And that soul sees every other soul as part of itself. And therefore, there is no distinction, there is no separateness. There's perfect unity, there's perfect one, there's perfect love. Says the Alter Rebbe, this is the real meaning of the verse. Love your fellow as much as you love yourself. What the verse is saying is live with your soul, which allows us to understand why this would be the rule of the entire Torah. Hillel the elder said, love your fellow as yourself. That's the entire Torah on one foot. Everything else is commentary. So we had a question. Praying to God is commentary to love your fellow? How is that commentary to love your fellow? You know what the answer is? Serving God starts with realizing that it's not about me. It's about a mission. And that is phrased by the words, love your fellow as yourself. Appreciate your soul, appreciate their soul. When you appreciate that, the rest of Torah is commentary. Not just the civil laws, not just don't steal and don't kill. Everything, praying, putting on the tefillin, lighting Shabbos candles. It's all about a soul experience. And that is all captured in the words, love your fellow as yourself. Does that make sense? You got that?
Yeah, well, that's how you're gonna love somebody you don't like.
There you go. Right?
Love and like are two separate.
Well, they're two separate words, but you can, or at least with this interpretation, it then helps me be able to then say, okay, I can understand you, or I can understand, given my circumstances, where I'm coming across very different situations with humans because of my circumstances. I'm learning a lot about people, a lot I don't want to know. But then now you're making me feel a little more kinder because of some particular people. So knowing about their soul and understanding that they too, I mean, because we all have a piece of God in us. That really is the truth. We all are God. But it helps me to then say, okay, give it a break.
So thank God we have another 40 minutes because we're going to get further, which will also address what's missing from this puzzle. So that takes us to the next text over here, which is Derech Mitzvosecha, written by the third Chabad Rebbe, which is also about love, but he kind of gives us a different gist than his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe. So let's see that inside. Do you want to read for us? This is the second text, the Derech Mitzvosecha.
The Arizona teaches that all Jewish souls come from one great soul, the soul of Adam.
Harishon, the first man, Adam.
Each Jew is like a different limb in one spiritual body. Some souls come from the head, others from the arms or feet, but they're all parts of the same being. That's why one Jew is spiritually responsible for another, because they're literally one. Even though we appear as separate people in different bodies, our soul remains deeply connected. Just like in a physical body where the hands feel pain when the foot is hurt, So too does one Jew suffer or sin, it affects all the others. This explains the mitzvah to love every Jew as yourself. It is not just an idea, it's a spiritual reality. Hating another Jew is like a limb cutting itself off the body. It creates a blemish. When we love each other, we become whole. Healthy soul, and only then can our prayers rise properly and God's presence dwell among us fully.
Okay, so I want to take this apart. Is this the same thing that we said previously? Do you think that this is the same message, or there's something added here or different?
I mean, what's added, I think, is the blemish, because we were talking about like bringing goodness into us, making everything positive. So I was struck by the blemish introduction
And
concept.
and how do you take that? You see that as a negative thing? Like, why are we going into negativity? Is that
Punishment, but I think
punishment?
it also it just lets you know, God created us perfectly, and we need to maintain that perfection. So it's a function that we need to continue to work on.
Joanne, you have any thoughts on that?
I don't.
Okay, so I want to share with you my thoughts, and I think they're very powerful.
Yeah, good one.
That was great,
Yeah,
and I'm going to
no,
get
that
to
was
that.
very good.
So I think there's a number of things here. First of all, on the simple reading of it, it sounds very similar, like you said. And the reason why it sounds very similar is because kind of like what the Alter Rebbe said, we're all one, we're all a soul, we're all one soul. So the way I would say it is like we're one body, there's a right hand and a left hand. The right hand is not different than the left hand because the right hand recognizes that I'm not a right hand, I'm a personality. And I'm here to function as this personality, and the left hand is exactly the same, right? So if we're on a soul level, we kind of scratch our differences, we shed our differences, we ignore our differences maybe, and we say, you know what? We're really one being, we're part of one whole, we're not separate, let's ignore our differences. So first of all, I want to talk about the blemish, which I think is a very powerful point, which is if a Machzedek comes and says, not only on a deeper level, we're the same, but we're the same. We're one body. When we're one body, so if you take out any part of the body is not whole. So not only am I not different than the other person, but I need the other person to be whole. So it's not a punishment as much as it's telling you, you look at the other person and you're not sure if you like them. Well, you want to like them because they are your wholeness. Just like a Torah scroll needs every letter of the Torah to be there, and if there's one letter missing, the entire Torah scroll is not a Torah scroll. The human body, or better said, the universe, is one universe. It's one body with one mission and one purpose. And if any of us are missing from that piece of the puzzle, it's incomplete. So when I meet another human being and I don't like them because they irk me, I should tell myself, you know why God didn't create them the way he created me? Is because he needs me. If he would have created them the same way he created me, he wouldn't need me. The fact that they're different is, first of all, the biggest compliment to me.
No, I was the walk a little. Come on, don't mind me.
The fact that they're different is the biggest compliment to me because it tells me that I am needed, that I'm important. Just like my right arm is actually very happy that my left arm is not a right arm. Because if it was a right arm, then the right arm would be unnecessary. Or my head, or my foot, I should say, is happy that it's not a head. My foot doesn't say, ooh, I wish I was a head. First of all, because it recognizes that there's just one whole. So we're not in competition. But secondly, more importantly, it says if I was a head, who would be the foot? I'm needed because I'm not a head. And equally, the head doesn't look at the foot and say, you're so stupid. He says, I'm happy that you're stupid because we need feet in this world.
Yeah.
Because if not for the feet, we wouldn't be whole. So when we see another person and we see their differences to us, instead of saying, I don't appreciate that, say, I appreciate that we're different because, first of all, that allows me to recognize that I'm unique, that I'm special, that I'm needed, that I'm more than just surviving, but I'm important, and they are important as well. They're just as needed. We're one whole. And the only reason why I'm going to be complete is because they are. And if they aren't, if I don't welcome them in, I'm incomplete. If the right hand would say, I'm going to ignore the left hand for the rest of my life because I see him as separate, the right hand is missing something. It's not just that he's missing the left hand, he's missing something within himself. And that Tzemach Tzedek over there goes on to a long discussion to talk about, I don't know if this was discovered in medicine at the time, or maybe it was a recent discovery at the time, but he talks about how medically we know that all the parts of the body are connected. And sometimes when someone has an issue in one part of the body, in their foot or in their head, by dealing with the foot, you could actually solve the issue in the head. We have every part of our body exists within every limb. They're all interconnected, they're all interrelated. It's the same DNA. And that DNA holds all the details as well. And therefore, we're not all that different, but more importantly, we need each other. Which brings us, if I wanted to say this very simply, I would say the Alter Rebbe told us that we're the same, but that says ignore your differences. The Tzemach Tzedek said, don't ignore your differences. Embrace your differences. You know why? Because you need them.
The differences.
Because they enhance you. The lawyer is not annoyed at the doctor because he needs a doctor. The doctor is not annoyed at the lawyer because he needs a lawyer. We need each other. We're not self-sustained. That's how God created the world, and he created it for that reason, because it's one world and we need each other. So we're going to dive into this a little more deeper soon, but that's the basic premise of this ideology, which is not only that we're one at our core, which says love but don't like, right? But no, like. You know what you should like? Like their differences, because you need their differences, because their differences enhance you. That's why you could love them as much as you love yourself, because they enhance your life. Phenomenal. So we really took a journey from where we started at the beginning. This doesn't make any sense. You can't love someone like you love yourself. And we realized, no, we're one core. And if I live with that, we are the same. And then to take that further, not only do we love them, but we like them because we need them, because they enhance me. We're going to take this a little bit further. There's a very beautiful letter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, which I found. Previous Rebbe was a very artistic writer, beautiful writer, and he spoke a lot about love, simply on a very basic level, loving other people, really authentically caring for somebody else, really showing concern and connection. And he writes here beautifully, and I'm going to ask Joanne if you could read the words of this letter. And also, if I could get a tissue. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. Go for it.
This is interesting. Okay. Let each man cleanse his heart of even the slightest trace of a negative character trait, and look upon his fellow with a kindly and compassionate eye, judging him favorably at all times. And if something which appears to be bad should be discovered, one should not step back silent. Instead, let matters be clarified and cleansed. But this should be done as a father admonishes his son and a man his brother. Then the words of admonishment will be words that spring from the heart and that find acceptance in the heart of the listener, and that also have an effect on the heart of the speaker himself. Right. Close friendship in love and amity opens the block of the heart that separates men, so that they unite and join in the strong bonds of pleasantness that proceed from the fountain of the Holy of Holies.
So this is a very practical letter. He's writing to his followers, and he's saying, this is the type of camaraderie that I would love to see among you guys. But clearly, mirroring this perspective, of this deep connection that we could have for each other, realizing who we are in our core. But I just thought it was beautiful wording of bringing this out on a practical level. Okay, which leads me to the final text that I brought here from Hillel, from the fifth Chabad Rebbe. This work, I should say, is an extremely long work. Here I have two sentences here which sums up a very tiny part of it. Maybe I'll speak about it a little more. He wrote this work after he saw an incident that happened in his court where he understood that there was a certain level of disgust from one person to another, and this really bothered him. And he felt like writing this work explaining why we should work on evolving and not being stuck in that distance from each other. And it's a phenomenal work. There's a lot of depth. And I'm just having send these two lines to work off, and we're going to try to explain this a little bit more. Okay, and which just brings me to this slide right over here, which is our last slide. Go for it. Could you read for us, Justina?
The essence of holiness is unity, and true unity does not mean sameness, but the ability to integrate opposites. Though fitful, one can recognize that
Through bittul, which means self-nullification.
through bittul, one can recognize that others' different view is not opposition, but an expression of a different divine mind.
Okay, so the reason why this slide has all these colorful colors, which I actually didn't tell it to do, but that's very cool that it chose that, is because there's something very powerful about beauty. Where is beauty seen? Or what is beauty? Beauty is, they say beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. But if you were to ask what defines beauty, what is it? I would define it, and we could argue about this, or we don't have to argue about this. Someone sent me a picture of a rainbow on Friday here in Manhasset. You saw it?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So apparently there was a rainbow here, and everyone says a rainbow is beautiful. Well, why is the rainbow beautiful? Because it's colorful. And beauty, in other words, is where opposites merge. And when I say merge, I mean unite. When we look at something and in our own mind, we are marveled. Why are we marveled? Because we are seeing two things, but we're not seeing two things, we're seeing one thing. And that reality of seeing one thing, but it's not one, it's two, but it's not two, it's one, is beautiful. And that could be a sculpture, because sculptures usually don't have art. Art is a soul thing. So when you have art coming onto a physical sculpture, that our heart says, wow, that's beautiful. Because we see this unification of body and soul. When you see a very, very big mountain, you're seeing a unification of body and soul. Or at least that's how we interpret it. We see, wow, this is something which is huge and it's physical. So that's a unification of body and soul. When we see poetry is words which are not supposed to have life. Alive words, a unity of body and soul. That's gorgeous. Song, notes, sounds. Sounds are not supposed to talk to my soul. Sounds that have soul, or put in other words, separated sounds that make up one song. Somehow there's a rhythm to it. Somehow I see it as one, even though they're separated. Or go back to the poem, every word stands on its own, but I don't see it as one. Somehow they're so perfect, right? The poems the good poems, you look at them and you're like, they couldn't have been written better. The message and the words are married to each other. The message wouldn't be whole without the words. The words wouldn't be whole without the message. They're married, they're one. Seeing those differences come together is beauty. And the same thing is with the rainbow. Same thing is with a prism. Seeing colors come together is beautiful. Seeing the color green is not beautiful. Seeing the color red is not beautiful. But seeing them work together is beautiful. And that's where we say unity is not sameness. In our brains, unity is sameness. So if I want to unite with someone else, I look to find the common ground. What's the commonality among us? Because otherwise, if you're different than me, how could I be together with you? How could we be different and together? But if I recognize what beauty is all about, I realize that we unite not despite our differences, not ignoring our differences, but because of our differences. Our differences unite us because you know why? If you had the same opinion as me, we couldn't have a conversation. Because you have a different opinion, we can have a conversation. We can fill in each other.
Right now. Sorry.
If there was another Levi Paltiel here, I would have an issue with him. But because there isn't, this is Joanne, this is Justine, I don't have an issue with any of you. I love the fact that you're different than me. That's what makes life so beautiful. Beauty is what unites differences.
Yeah.
And we don't unite despite the differences. We unite with our differences. We unite celebrating our differences. You know, instead of your child coming over to you and not feeling so good, and you try to maybe diminish their differences, what they see as negative, we celebrate it by saying, this is your uniqueness. Instead of saying, no, you're not all that different. We're really the same. No. You're so different, which is why you're so special. And which is why we're so connected. Because God is not just about bringing together the world, that we enhance each other. And it's not even about a greater purpose that ignores our differences. But God is that sense of beauty. God is found when differences get along. And the same thing is true with our inner differences. You know, we all have ups and downs. We all have conflicts. And we seem to need to settle the conflicts. We have this need of, I want to be whole. I want to be one. I want to be united within myself. So I want to get rid of those conflicts. Why did God make me so fragmented? And the truth is, if I were to let go, and I were to say, the fact that I have an up sometimes, the fact that I'm down, the fact that sometimes I'm depressed, and the fact that sometimes I'm happy, is not, neither of them is a blessing or a curse. They're beautiful because of the different stages. The ups and downs are beautiful. The fact that I have changed is beautiful. You know why it's beautiful? Because if I only had one way of going, I would never look up. I would never say there's something deeper to me than myself. If I was just kind and I was always kind, I never was not kind. So then I would be stuck in that way. The fact that I'm not kind, but I'm not mean, and I'm not disciplined. I'm a mix of both. Maybe we would think confused. I stop and I say, so what am I? I'm a piece of God. God is not locked into one way. And to find my inner truth means to find God. And that's where unity is. Unity is not found by sameness. Unity is found by harmony. Harmony is found by beauty. Beauty is about celebrating our differences, recognizing that our differences are not only interdependent, but they're one and the same, because my difference is only beautiful with your difference.
Well, I wish we lived that way, but we don't.
We could, or at
Well, we could,
moments,
which would then bring us to a whole
moment-
different
in
conversation.
moments of introspection and moments of thought, we could, just knowing it and learning about this is something that, changes our day for the next few minutes, and it's something that brings us closer to God, brings us closer to ourselves. Which brings me to just a line that I love over here, which says over here, it says, a different opinion isn't a threat, it's another angle of God's truth. When someone says another opinion from us, we tend to get threatened. We tend to say,
Your
well,
opinion is wrong.
truth is either mine or yours.
Right.
So if what you're saying is true and I'm saying is not true. But the truth is that truth is not locked into one way.
Right.
Truth, if real truth is true everywhere, in every circumstance. And you know why we're different? We're not different despite truth. We're different because of truth. Because truth is everything. And everything has a lot of parts. And therefore we're all different. So the fact that, it says that Torah, Torah has 60 layers, or Torah has 600,000 ways of explaining it. Every word of Torah. Does that make Torah not true? It makes Torah that much more true. Because it's true in every circumstance, it's true in every possibility, it's true intellectually, emotionally, and actually, it's true in every realm of life, in every facet of a human being, in every personality. So when I meet another personality and I am more intellectual, they're more emotional, and I give my intellectual take, and they give an emotional take, instead of shutting them down, I could say, you know what? Only because of them am I privy to another aspect of God's truth. Because if not for them, I would be limited to what God granted me. God gave each of us a godly perspective, but very limited. We all understand that. We're all limited. And by letting us really hear the other person, it's not just saying, we feel so good when we let the other person speak. Because we were like, despite the fact that they're wrong, I'm going to let them speak. Or one of my teachers used to say, we were to study Talmud, so we'd get very feisty. We would argue with each other. And in yeshiva, they really encourage the questions and the argument. And the teacher would say what he thought the Talmud was saying, and I would say, no, that's wrong, that can't be. And I would argue with him, and he had this line, he would say, it's a democracy, you have the right to be wrong. Right? So we feel so good when we say it's a democracy, you have the right to be wrong. But it's not about feeling good. It's about realizing it's a democracy. It's a democracy. You have the right to be right. And that doesn't take away from me. Real truth is saying you have the right to be right, but it doesn't take away from me. You being right doesn't take away from me being right. We could both be right. Like the famous joke of the couple that came to the rabbi, and they were arguing, they had this issue, and they said the rabbi has to figure it out for them. And he said his side, and the rabbi turned to him and said, you're right, you're 100% right. And then she turned to the rabbi and she said, but what do you mean, this and this? And the rabbi says, you're also 100% right. So there was someone else in the room, and that person said, how could they both be right? The rabbi says, you're also right. Appreciating difference, appreciating harmony, bringing together our differences is what allows us to tap into God, which I think highlights this line. A different opinion is another angle of God's truth, is really what highlights this point that I was saying before, which I think is so beautiful. Conflict, even within ourselves and with others, is not an obstacle to tranquility, to inner peace, but it's actually the way to reach inner peace. Is brought up by this line, and the reason why I say that is simply like this, something very simple. Because if I was only privy to my perspective on life, which I could only be, like God couldn't have created me with more than one perspective, because that I would be a mess. God created me as a limited being, and I have one perspective. If I was only privy to that perspective, I would see that as truth. But the fact that I'm now privy to another perspective tells me that neither of them are the truth, but the truth is something which is bigger than our differences. And that's where serenity is. That's where peace is. That's where happiness is. Happiness lies when we realize that it's not about me or you, something deeper, something more truthful. And realizing that we could both be true is telling us that there's a higher reality which we're both not privy to, but we are privy to it by embracing our differences. Okay. Is that all? That is all. I have a short video that I want to play, which I think brings this out beautifully. Before I play that video, there's one short story that I was going to say that I think brings this idea out in a beautiful way. So generally, we spoke about loving your fellow as yourself on these three levels that we spoke about. The core, embracing our differences because it enhances us. And then finally, the third level, which is kind of bringing together those first two levels, which is saying we're celebrating our differences because they're really one. That's the idea of beauty, the idea of truth, still one. To illustrate this in a story, which I think is beautiful, is there's a rabbi, he lives now in Kfar Chabad in Israel. His name is Rabbi Zalman Gupin. He says the story on videotape. He says when he was a young student learning in yeshiva, so he would have his up days and his down days. He was days that he was very happy. He woke up in the morning, jolly, in a good mood. And there were days that he woke up melancholy and not such a good mood and heavy. And he saw it as, first of all, inconsistency, which is not, you don't see that as a good thing. And, how is that productive? And he also saw it as maybe a lack of truth. He's not in touch with the truth, because if he was in touch with the truth, he would be one or the other. He would be in tune with the truth. He would do the right thing. And why does he have these ups and downs? And he went into the Rebbe in a private audience, and he asked Rebbe his question. And you would expect Rebbe to tell him either, don't worry about it, it's so normal, you're okay. Or the Rebbe could tell him something like, try to work on it, aim for this or aim for that, try to be positive or whatever it might be. Rebbe didn't say that. Rebbe said like this. Rebbe said, animals God created. This is a different discussion. It's not for now. It's a very deep discussion for another time. But animals were created with one nature. Every animal is one nature. They don't have ups and downs. Animals are either kind or disciplined. Animals are either energetic or heavy. They don't have ups and downs. Humans, being intellectual beings, having brains, we are not one nature. We have it all. We have the best and the worst. We're a composite, right? Is that the right word? We're composition, right? We're made up of parts. We have it all. Said the Rebbe the following. In other words, what he's telling him, what it sounds to me like he's telling you on face value, is this is your reality. You're a human being, you have ups and you have downs. But then he says something further. And I don't think that's all he was saying, and I'll get to that soon. He said, okay, therefore, when you're in a heavy mood, use that to your advantage. Because there's certain things that you could do when you're in a heavy mood, and you can't do them when you're in a very light mood. You know what? When you pray in a heavy mood, if you take that to your advantage, the prayer is going to be that much more deep. There's a certain depth, there's a certain realness, there's a certain rawness that you could reach in prayer when you're heavy, which you can't reach when you're all positive and light. And there's a certain depth in learning, right? We all know that study takes discipline. And when you're in a very light mood and a very happy, jolly mood, it's very hard to have that discipline, to study on that level. We could read, but to sit and study in a deep level is hard when we're in a jolly mood. Everybody said, don't waste your heaviness on light reading. Use it on heavy reading, because you're in a heavy mood. Beautiful. And then he said, when you're in your light mood, it's just as beautiful. Pray, happy, jolly, use that to your benefit. Again, harness it. And then also when it comes to studying, study a lot, just read a lot. You're full of energy, so get it out there. Do it. Harness those differences. And I think that we could look at this on the same levels as the same three levels that we spoke about before. He came in saying, I'm fragmented. I'm all over the place. Make me one. Unify me. Bring me together. And the first message you could take from this is, well, you only have one mission, which is to serve God. So ignore the difference. It's not about heavy or light. It's about serving God. So whatever it is, serve God. You are one because you're just about serving God. That would be the first way of looking at this story. another way of looking at this story, a different way, is again, the Rebbe is saying, well, you are made up of parts, you are different, you are fragmented. So you know what? Use it for your benefit. You're actually going to gain from the difference because there's something that you could get when you're like this that you can't get when you're like that. So use the fact that you're all over the place because that's going to help you. But then the third, which I think is the real message the Rebbe was saying, is no. The Rebbe was saying, you know why the human being is fragmented? You're not fragmented because you're messed up. You're fragmented because you're a human being. And the human being is fragmented because they're created in the image of God. Humans are created in the image of God. And because we're created in the image of God, we have love and we have fear. We have kindness and we have discipline. We're not locked into one way. Why? Because we're created in the image of God. And realizing that my separateness, that my confusion, quote unquote, is because I'm connected to a deeper reality, a godly reality, allows me to dive into that. It allows me to harness those differences. God, you know why God gave you melancholy? Because that could bring you to a truth that you couldn't get if you were only this way. And you know why he gave you the other one? Because that will bring you to another truth that you couldn't get if you were only the other way. Recognizing that our separateness, our confusion, our split personality, so to speak, is actually what makes us beautiful, what makes us so delicious. That's what makes us whole. We don't have to be whole by ignoring our differences. We're whole because we are one.